Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Examine Life podcast, where we take some of life's thorniest questions and deconstruct them in pragmatic and philosophical ways. I am joined today by my friend, my Twitter homie, Kevin Dahlstrom. And our question today is going to be, how do you define success? What's up, Kevin?
Hey, Kay, I feel like this is a long time coming. We've talked to each other quite a bit on Twitter, but have never actually interacted live. So this is going to be fun.
I am so excited. And I'm not making this up because you're on the podcast. You are my favorite follow on all of Twitter. And so it's incredible. And what, like we were saying before, it's just this kindred, like textured to life that we see in each other. It's very earnest, and I'm so honored to explore it today.
Well, wow, that's a huge compliment. Thank you so much. And I think, what's interesting about Twitter is it kind of naturally birds of a feather flock together. And, there's a few people I could list out. You're one of them. We share a lot of the same values, and we think about life the same way. So we're probably preaching to the choir. It's like mutual admiration society.
Yes. I love it. So actually, that makes a good starting point. So you tweet a lot. You have these epic threads. We'll make sure to link to them.
Yep.
But I want to ask you, you're sitting in front of your keyboard, computer, and you're like, okay, I'm going to go tweet. Like, what's going through your head, like right before you start typing?
Yeah, no, great question. If it's okay, I may even back up a little bit further.
Of course.
And talk a little bit about how I got started on Twitter, because I think a lot of the people I follow, a lot of my friends I've met through Twitter, we sort of have the same or similar journey. And it started really with the pandemic. I've always enjoyed writing. I think it's the single best way to sharpen thinking. It's cathartic. It serves so many good purposes. And I like to make writing a part of my daily routine. I'd gotten out of that practice. And then if you remember, during the early stages of the pandemic, we were in the lockdown phase. You remember the 2 weeks to flatten the curve? It ended up being a little bit more than 2 weeks, of course. But I just started posting things online. I'd had a Twitter account since 2007 and was always just a lurker. And, I was at home a lot. I had nothing better to do. So I just started posting things. What was interesting is a lot of the guys who I follow now, like one that comes to mind is Nick Huber. He's a good friend of mine now. And he got started around the same time. And I remember we did a Zoom call early on, and both of us had like 1,000 followers. Like, it was super early days. And the power of Twitter was already becoming clear to us. And so the way I approach it, and I think this is a little bit different than most people on Twitter, Twitter has always just been sort of like my personal journal. My only litmus test for what I publish is, am I proud of it? I really write for mostly an audience of one, and there's pros and cons to that. The pro is that, I only try to please myself. So whether it gets 2 likes or 10,000 likes, it really doesn't affect me that much as long as I'm proud of what I wrote. The flip side is, if you do want to try to grow your account, it's a terrible strategy, right? Because especially today with the recent changes to the algorithm, we know what works, right? It's the engagement stuff. And I just can't make myself play that game. I don't really have a reason to. So I'm really happy to build brick by brick. But that's a long-winded way to answer your question. But the short of it is, I write about what I'm inspired about. And what you see on Twitter is maybe 1/10 of what I write. So I start a bunch of threads, a bunch of posts, and most of them don't work out. They're not something I'm proud of. So about 1 in 10, that's about the right ratio. About 1 in 10 ends up getting posted.
Oh, wow. Incredible. And I just want to share with our listeners that, I think that there's this preconception that on social media, you have to be performative. You have to do what the gurus are telling you to do. You have to trick the algorithm. And I would hope to fall in the same category as well. You bring an earnestness to it and a sincerity, and people see that. And look, I haven't checked in your follower count recently, but I'm sure it's in the 50,000s, 100,000s. It's huge. Yep. And so to anyone that's listening, that's like, oh, I can't play this game, or, oh, I don't have this many followers to begin with as K, know that with earnestness and consistency, and like you said, discarding 90% of the drafts, you'll get there, right? And then you'll make these incredible human connections.
Yeah. I mean, I always tell people to just start shouting into the void. You've got 0 followers, start commenting on posts of people that you like. And it's kind of one of those things that happens slowly, then all at once. Like for
Yeah.
months, it'll seem like you're getting nowhere. And then all of a sudden you start picking up an audience. I have a quick funny story though. So this is probably a year ago. I started thinking, well, maybe I should, put a little bit more effort into just growing my audience. And so I actually paid a big Twitter influencer who has over 1 million followers just to give me some advice on how to grow my account. And I remember he looked at my account and then he came back and he said, it's almost as if you're trying to lose followers, Kevin. And he gave me 8 different things that I should do to increase engagement and gain followers. And guess what? I implemented 0 of them. Because ultimately I searched my soul and I said, what do I really write on Twitter for? And again, first and foremost, it's for myself. I love the fact that I have a following now and I get all this great feedback, but I've always remained true to that sort of thing. Like I view this as a practice for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's, as we get into our question, right? How do you define success? I think if you were doing engagement baity, thirst trappy Twitter, you wouldn't be successful. Again, we'll talk about the different levers thereof. Before we dive in, for those that don't know you, and instead of having you give your full bio, I want to start with a moment. You called it one of your pivotal moments in your life. You're in a boardroom, you have a bunch of CMO experience, you're making, millions of dollars. Tell us who you are through the frame of that pivotal moment.
Yeah. So the 10-second background, just to kind of provide some context, is I'm 52 years old. I've been at it for a long time. I rose to the top ranks in corporate America, was a CMO of 2 public companies and some other large private companies. But I've also always had one foot in the startup world. I've founded 4 companies, but I did have a really kind of an epiphany, and this was about 6 years ago now, that really changed my life, that led to a massive amount of change in my life. I was a CMO of a multi-billion-dollar company, was making, salary guaranteed well into the 7 figures. So I was a made man, so to speak. And I remember very distinctly, I was sitting in a boardroom with our board of directors, all of whom were white men in their 50s and 60s. They were all, by financial measures, they were all absurdly successful. But I looked around the room and there wasn't a single person I wanted to emulate. Almost all of them were super unhealthy physically. I knew most of them were unhappy, had broken relationships, whatever. And it kind of dawned on me that this is the path I'm on. I'm going to be these guys. And so for me, it was a moment in time. I kid you not, Kay, from that moment, I couldn't spend another day in that office. I had to make change. And it was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back in a way. It was a change that was long overdue. I realized really that I'd built this life that looked incredible on paper, like checked all the boxes that everybody always dreams of, huge mansion in the suburbs, beautiful family, all the trappings of success, the country club memberships, the big title, the big paycheck, whatever. But I was living the life of somebody that just wasn't me. And I was playing the role of this guy, Kevin, who was not who I was. And so I kind of rebooted my life. I mean, the short story is I quit my job with nothing planned to do next. I moved the family to Boulder, Colorado, which is where I live now, and made a bunch of other changes in my life. And, now fast forward 6 years to today, and man, I have a great life. I'm so happy with the hard decisions that I made and the change that I made.
I love that. Oh, you're giving me goosebumps. Our stories are staggered by effectively a decade. I'm 8 years younger than you, but everything, same thing. I had that same moment at 35, making millions of dollars, looking around me. I'm like, great life, not for me.
Yep.
And also quit without a plan. So it's fascinating to hear that all. So let me ask you, you had all the trappings, but is there a feeling or a behavior that was taking place, while you were still in that role that you're like, this is not me?
Yeah. You know what the big catalyst for me was? It was rock climbing. So I've been a rock climber for 25 years. And it became progressively a bigger part of my identity in my life. It became a bigger part of my friend group. And what rock climbing showed me, it gave me a glimpse of, is that there's a world out there where money and status mean nothing. And by the way, that world provides some of the best experiences I've ever had in my life. It was very eye-opening. Unfortunately, a lot of people, and especially men, in the business world don't have that opportunity to see another world because their entire identity is tied up in their work or in that life that I described. If you don't know anything different, you think you're winning. So having a glimpse into that kind of other world was hugely informative to me. And what I realized was ultimately the only things of value in life are experiences and relationships. And those two are very related because the best experiences are shared with others. And the second piece of it is some of the best experiences in life don't cost much money at all.
Yeah.
And so what I learned is that ultimate wealth, the ultimate luxury is control over your time and the ability to have freedom to spend your time as you choose to collect those experiences and invest in those relationships. So for me, that was like the catalyst was absolutely rock climbing and all the things I saw through that pursuit.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So if we go back to our question of like defining success, you have experiences, relationships, and then of which you need control of your time to, invest in those. I would assume you would probably put health. You would infer that health would go into that category as well.
It's worth noting that like when people hear control of your time, that they might roll their eyes and say, yeah, it's really easy for a couple of rich guys to say, well, how great is it to have control of your time? But the other thing I realized, something that I've talked about publicly before is like, I've walked away from more money that I've made in my life. So I put my money where my mouth is. And it's partially because I realized that it actually doesn't take a huge amount of financial wealth to live a great life. To realize that, you really have to break out of that, what I call the hamster wheel, which is you're kind of running hard and you don't really see that there's these other aspects to life where money and status doesn't matter.
Yeah. So you were rock climbing, you were in Dallas before Boulder.
I did, yeah.
So is that all indoor climbing? I don't know the Dallas topography.
I lived in Dallas for most of my career and frankly, way too long. And I would climb in gyms, but I would also travel a lot to climb.
Oh, I see.
It was okay for a while, but eventually it felt like I was living my life in these short windows of time. Like this is the time when you get to actually be yourself and enjoy yourself. And then this is the time when you have to lead your normal life. The other thing was because I lived in Dallas, it pulled me away from my family. To pursue my passion, I had to be away from my family. So there was always this tension. And by the way, that's why I'm such a big advocate for being very deliberate about choosing where you live, because ultimately that's one decision that really does inform everything. And it's such a huge ingredient in building a great life.
Yeah. And we've exchanged threads on that. So we live similar story. I surf a ton, but I surfed very leisurely when I lived in New York. So it was almost more like a dream and an aspiration than a tested, like I do this, like my money where my mouth is. So in some regards, it was a little bit of a risk to move by the ocean because like anything, the grass is always, it's especially surfing, which is so culturally aspirational. That you could just be like, all of my problems in life will be solved if I just become a surfer. And you and I both know that there's no activity that can promise that level of deliverance. But I can relate, we live walking distance to the beach in Manhattan Beach, LA. It's probably like a $3,000 a month premium to be able to walk to the beach than to be able to drive. But I don't have a gym membership. I never need to fly to surf. Those are that's like 20 grand of flights and trips right there. And it's that the simplicity and the ease, right? It's literally, it's just there. And so tell me a bit more though, because I do think that here, you have two men who have had successful careers, who had financial runway that like they could take time to kind of craft their own jobs, so to speak. What do you tell someone that might be, earlier in their lives, let's say like late 20s, having their first kid, still very much in the upward trajectory, and they hear us, they're like, just go move to a beach or go move to your favorite rock climbing. What is the path? What is the glide path between that person and us look like?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that's the question that anybody who watches this or most people who watch this will be asking. And I think the answer has to do with seasons of life. And, I always tell people that what you see of me today is the end result, right? There was a long process to get here. And I will tell you that I came out of college in the 90s. I started my career in the 90s. I started in management consulting. And if I would have mentioned the idea of like lifestyle or work-life balance in those days, I would have been laughed out of the office. Like that wasn't even something that was discussed. So the good news is the world has come a really long way. And I think the pandemic was sort of an inflection point for that. Remote work is a complete game changer. So now, whereas this wasn't possible before, now many, many, many people have control over where they are, which is a huge ingredient for a great life. All that said, again, there's a season for putting your head down and grinding. Look, when you're young, you've got a family, whatever, there's no substitute for hard work. You've got to put in the work to get ahead. Now, I don't think that requires if you listen to a lot of the grind set people on Twitter, 100 hours a week, you're eating pizza and working around the clock. I've never done that in my life. And I'll stack my resume up against anybody's. I think you have to be smart about how you work. You have to work with a real intensity. And the reality was I wasn't climbing 4 or 5 days a week in my 20s and 30s like I am now. And so these privileges are earned. And this is what I tell people. So I have a very engaged audience on Twitter. And so I love it that I get, probably at least a dozen DMs from young men, probably in their late 20s to early 40s every week. And I take the time to answer all of them. I consider it part of my job. And they're usually asking for advice. It's usually a long direct message that lays out their life and it says, hey, what should I do? What I learned very quickly is the circumstances really don't matter because my answer is always the same. And it basically comes down to being deliberate. So what I say is take the time to step back and define what I call the ideal end state life. It's literally a bulleted list of what does your life look like on a day-to-day basis if you could have any life you wanted, just the ideal life. Literally bulleted out, like on my list, it includes things like lots of time in the sun, like that level of detail. And then you've got a destination, right? You've defined the destination. And now you can start working backward. You can't have all there's 30 something bullet points on my particular list. When I was in my 20s, I couldn't have all those 30 things. I could have maybe one or two, but I knew what to do to, it shines a light on the path right in front of you. You know what to do to earn the rest of those bullet points. And now I'm happy to say, I was just looking at my list the other day. I've pretty much got all of them now, right? But I'm 52 years old. I've earned it. So, so the summary is there are seasons to life, but even in the season where it's time to put your head down and grind a bit, you can be really deliberate about the direction you're grinding in. That's a lesson that I wish I had learned earlier, because I spent a lot of years kind of grinding in the wrong direction toward this end state that I really didn't want.
Yes. Oh, I love that. And so what I'm hearing kind of two things. It's like brick by brick approach. And I love that you have 30 of the items at 52 and maybe at 22, you might have had 2, right? Or what? Well, what was the last, what's the most recent one you acquired on the list?
I'm actually pulling it up right now. So I'll just read a few.
I think it's on Twitter too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll read a few just to give you a sense of what this list looks like. Challenging, intellectually stimulating work done on my terms. Mornings free to read, write, and think. At least one active creative project. Control 90% of my schedule. Lots of sunshine and time outside. Ability to live and work anywhere. Small, beautifully designed home with a view. That's about the first 7 or 8. There's probably 25 or 30. The last one on the list is financial assets that fund this lifestyle indefinitely. So that, that may be one of the harder ones to achieve. It takes time. But again, this is it's not an overnight thing, but it's really, really important. I found, again, back to these people who reach out to me, which is, like I said, a dozen a week. In every case, I've never heard that this didn't work. In every case, when they took the time to run through this simple exercise, you can do it with your spouse and just define that end state, the answer to their question about what to do today almost always becomes obvious. Well, of course, I don't want to take that job in Cincinnati because it's not aligned at all with where I want to be long-term, right? Or maybe the opposite is true. And so it's an incredibly powerful but super simple exercise.
I love that. And I also think too, there's a few, actually, I have something similar. It's not as complex, but one is surf every day, be creatively inspired, wear whatever I want. Only be around people, including clients who are positive, who are good energy, and be able to control my time and and move every day. That was another one. So mine's similar like that.
Yeah. So I have one on positive vibes only, 0 toxic people in my inner circle. And
Love
then, of
that.
course, climb several times a week and train toward 514, which is a difficulty level in climbing. But I want to also add, Kay, that a lot of
Yeah.
these things are completely related. So we talked earlier about how I believe it's super important, like where you live is a really like kind of foundational decision. Well, in my case, like if I want to climb several times a week or you want to surf every day, we literally, that requires living in your case, near a beach. In my case, I'm looking out the window right now at the Flatirons where I climb several times a week. And also it requires control of your time, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to be able to climb or surf every day or every other day. And so all these things kind of work together. You can earn them incrementally, but to really get the magic, they all have to work together.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the incremental piece because I think what happens is that people they look at you and I and they think that they have to get it all in one fell swoop. We're like, no, dudes, we've been doing this for multiple decades.
Yeah.
So that'd be one thing. But I think the other thing that I've seen, Kevin, and I'm curious that you see this, people say I'm very fit and I love taking care of my body. So I do yoga, I run, I power lift. I'm very conscious about my eating. I surf and all that. And people will say like, you have the time and you have the money, so you can do all of that. They almost like, oh, that's why the Kardashians are so fit. They have all this. But what I'll say back to that person is like, you don't just turn those things on just because you got money. You don't turn them on just because you got free time. If you look back when I was an investor, so I was from a slightly after era, but I always joke, I was like, no one gave a fuck about sleep.
Yeah.
They're like, people would be like, I took this red eye. It's like, this red eye is shorter. So I'm the real man because my red eye was shorter than, like the Utah to New York red eye is shorter than the, LA to New York red eye. But even though I was working so hard, I would go take runs in New York City at 1 a.m. when I got home from work. Or I'd do 100 push-ups before going to work on three hours of sleep. And so that was the brick that, yes, today I have the infrastructure. I have the time. I have the money. I have 2 gym memberships, and I surf. And so I have that, but it's only an extension of the bricks that were laid in your 20s.
Let me just add something to that.
Yeah.
So those people, the haters that are saying, you have the time, I don't have the time. You know what? They're actually right, because one thing that I've really come to believe is like a foundational belief of mine now is whatever you believe, you're right. Your beliefs absolutely become self-fulfilling. So if you don't believe you have the time to work out, then you don't. If you believe you do, then you absolutely do. Because the reality is, I challenge you to find anyone who has done more or been busier, quote unquote, busier than me in their life. And I always found a way to stay fit because, again, that's one of those foundational things, right? Where you live, your fitness, those are foundational components of building a great life. You can't have a great life if you're not fit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and look, there's trade-offs. Like I exercise a ton. I meditate 40 minutes a day. But one thing I can't hang on, TV shows. I don't watch TV.
I don't watch any.
And I still haven't seen the last Game of Thrones. And I'm fine. I don't miss it. It's not my thing. Like, occasionally I'm like, I hear of some great series that I should be on top of. But that's a choice that I've made. And it's like, I have a choice every night. Am I going to meditate for 20 minutes or am I going to watch a Netflix show?
Yeah.
I will always take the meditation. For me, that's what works for me.
Yeah. Do you know you ever heard the quote there's a Russian powerlifter named Jerzy Gregorek, and he has this amazing quote. It's very simple. He says, easy choices, hard life. Hard choices, easy life. Building a great life is really just about making good choices every day and doing a little bit of work every day and letting that compound for 30 years, 20 years, whatever. Yeah.
One thing I'd love to talk about on your list is that one thing that it's not that it's missing, but it shows, do a creative thing every day or, intellectually challenging problems. I'm paraphrasing.
Right.
But you have found work. I'm putting it in quotes, work that you find deeply fulfilling. So for now, we've talked a lot about like the time and the fitness and the habits, but how did you land on the actual activity? Because you work your butt off, you work a lot. Yep. How did you land on the activity that you found fulfilling?
Yeah. Well, first, it's important to note that the notion of retirement it's like a mirage. It's an outdated and misguided notion where like you work, and then all of a sudden there's one day where you stop working and live a life of leisure. A life of leisure quickly becomes a life of misery and boredom. You can't be happy if you're not experiencing some form of struggle and uncertainty. The best it gets in life is the ability or the luxury to choose your struggle. And so, and again, this is something that it's a right that you earn over time. I'm fortunate to be in a position now where I choose the things I work on. And the simple answer is it's different for everybody, but for me, it's just things that inspire me. I'm a builder. I enjoy building stuff. I like ideas. I'm a creative type. So that sort of dictates the type of work that inspires me. But again, my goal is not to stop working or, I've tried, like there's been periods in my life where I thought I wanted to just take a break for a while and just rock climb. That's not enough for me. I need more.
Too many hours in the day.
So to that point, there's something I tell people all the time, which is one thing that billionaires and broke people have in common is that they have 16 waking hours a day that they have to fill with meaning. And as hard as it may be for some people to believe, when you could be ultra wealthy financially and still have a lot of boredom and have trouble filling those days with meaning. And often that comes because I have a lot of friends who have fallen into this trap where they've had an incredible amount of business and financial success, but at some point that just isn't enough anymore. That's not fulfilling anymore. But what they realize often too late is that they have nothing else in their life. They're one-dimensional. They're not multidimensional. So they have nothing else to turn to. And so they can have $100 million in the bank and kind of be miserable because they don't know how to spend those 16 hours.
Yeah. I remember reading somewhere that you can only buy back, I forget the number, but it's like you can only buy back like 5 or 6 hours of your time per day because you can't buy someone to exercise for you. You can't buy someone to enjoy leisure or the opera for you. So back to that question though of inspiration. We're in your 20s. You're presumably in marketing.
I came up through the marketing ranks, mostly in tech companies.
Would you say that you were always doing work that you found inspiring throughout your...
I think of it's not a binary thing. It's more of a spectrum. So, So in the early days, maybe you have 10% control over the work you do. Like you can kind of like get in a job that's like sort of interesting to you, but ultimately like you're low man on the totem pole. You don't have a lot of control. But that doesn't like change dramatically overnight. What you can do, and this is why it's really important, per my point earlier, to be deliberate, is you slowly gain more control over the work you do so that at some point you cross that 50% mark. And matter of fact, it's funny. I know I was looking back at a post I made a couple years ago where I said that I have control over about 50%. 50% of the work I do is because it's work I would do whether I was paid or not. 50% I do it because I was getting paid. And even in the 2 years since I made that post, that number has changed. I'd say it's probably like 80% of the work I do right now is stuff I would do even if I wasn't being paid. And 20% I do it just because, it pays the bills and whatnot. So again, it's like a sliding scale where slowly you gain control.
What do you think changed from that 50 to 80? Because it's in this chapter of your life, right?
The big thing that changed for me is when I wrote that post, I'd started a company. I'd founded a venture-backed startup, and I was in the thick of it, right? So if you're going to sign up for that kind of duty, you got to recognize that you only have so much control over your life. And we sold that company back in May. So now I've got almost complete control over what I do.
I love that. I knew that. I didn't realize that it was venture-backed. A venture-backed company seems to, at the surface, go against a lot of the list of your bullet points, meaning like control, ownership of your time, and so on. A, is that true? And then B, were you making explicit trade-offs in future of some better tomorrow?
So I was just joking with some friends about this, that I've spent way too much of my career grinding away, trying to change the world in venture-backed startups versus doing easier things that just could have made a lot more money. Here's the problem though. I'm attracted like a moth to flame. Like I just can't not do it. I love creating things. I love building. I love the pressure. I love everything about it. But you're absolutely right. When you sign up to be the founder, CEO of a startup, and especially if you take outside capital like venture capital, you're signing up for a tour of duty. And you're giving up a lot of control. And so that's something you have to be really deliberate about. I never say never, but I'm probably past that phase of my life because part of, again, back to my ideal end state, I don't think I want to be in a full-time operating role again, because even if you're not in a startup, if you just have a regular job, or even if you're just like the CEO of your own company, that's a level of commitment.
People need you.
Yeah, it dictates your time. It really does. So I've really been on a rampage the past year or so about like, I want to start each week with an empty calendar. Now, my calendar doesn't end up staying empty because there are things I choose to do, but I don't want a calendar full of, there's this notion, and it's some like you were mentioning, like in the investment banking world, like it was like a badge of honor to see who was the toughest. Like in the startup world or in some of the business circles, there's like this notion that like having a full calendar is like a badge of honor. And to me, it's the opposite. It's a sign of a lack of control.
Yeah. So I just want to point out to our listeners, though, that what was the range of Swell? That was probably the last 3 or 4 years, if I reverse engineer.
So we incubated Swell inside of a public company, and then we spun it out January 1st, 2020. So that was, all told, it was like a 3-year burn.
Got it. So just so people are listening, Kevin is talking about owning his time, rock climbing, experiences, all that stuff, and was the founder and CEO of a venture-backed company for the last 3 years. So it's not, it's not like either or, right? There, you can find the harmony, you can kind of push the trade-offs. Did you climb less during those 3 years?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, like, it's really, again, it's a spectrum. Like, I definitely gave up some control of my time, had to travel some, so I didn't have the ability to just climb whenever the weather's great. But I would say I set pretty hard boundaries on my lifestyle in terms of, like, I'm not willing to compromise, especially at this stage of life. I'm not willing to compromise beyond a certain degree.
Yeah, I love that. Let's shift gears to something that you seem pretty immune to, and that is the status games. And you mentioned the mansion in Dallas, the country club memberships, probably like ridiculous burn to maintain all those things.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the seduction of the status and then how you were able to eject out of it? Because so many people are in that first part with the country clubs and the big house, but they become trapped. Like, how are you able to not get trapped?
Yeah, I think, you're right that a lot of people fall into that trap because, if you listen to society, especially in the age of social media, there's a certain definition of success that it lays out for you. And if you're like me, you don't really question that when you're younger. You just sort of start grinding and you think that's what winning looks like. And so I obtained that. And what I found and what millions of other people have found is there's a great quote from Yvon Chouinard, who's the founder of Patagonia. And he says, when you reach the summit of a mountain, the thing you realize is there's nothing there. Quite literally, on the summit of a mountain, there's nothing. It's the journey and the struggle where you have to find the reward. And so I found it, like as many others do, really unfulfilling. And many are trapped in that to the degree that it's really hard to escape. It's hard for anybody to escape. But again, rock climbing opened my eyes to a different world. I tell people this, and some people actually call bullshit because they don't believe that it's actually true, but it really is. A lot of so most of my closest friends now come from rock climbing, not business. And it's true that probably about half of them literally don't even know what I did in my career. It's just not something
and they're not on Twitter. The rock climbers are not on Twitter.
They don't care, nor should they. It's just not something that comes up in our conversations. We talk about other stuff. And I found that so refreshing, and it spoke to me. And so that was kind of like having a glimpse of that was really a catalyst, and then embracing that wholeheartedly. And again, it comes down to like, it's easy to say that like the best things in life are free, or that relationships and experiences are the best things in life and those don't cost a lot of money. It's another thing to take action on it. And I think a lot of people, I talk to people all the time. I've got one particular friend who's a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company who's absolutely trapped in this. They know that their life is not great, that they want to get away from this money and status game. They just don't know how, because it's 100% of their identity. So I think the way you kind of head that off at the pass is by deliberately building a life where your work is not 100% of your identity or even your primary identity.
Yeah. And it's effectively like a diversifying your identity, right?
Yeah.
If all you are is a CEO, then you're not going to leave that. That's it. It's
Yeah.
all you are.
And things that you can do to kind of knock yourself off center and kind of reboot a little bit. I'm a huge believer in getting out in nature. I just hosted an event here in Boulder for 18 people. Thank you. 18 people last week. And trust me, this was like a group of absolute business killers. Like I was probably one of the least successful people in that group. Even for that group, when I was able to expose them a little bit to my world of rock climbing, I could see the change in them.
Yeah.
They recognize that, like, the fact that I have a bunch of money in my bank account ain't going to help me get up this rock, right? The rock doesn't give a shit who you are. And so doing things like that really help. It's a catalyst for changing your mind and changing your thinking.
This might come across as kind of cheesy, but I know a lot of people, like that CEO example, they have no hobbies.
Yeah.
And so, I can't say to someone, hey, try surfing, or you can't say to someone, go try rock climbing. Probably a little bit, well, maybe you can. But how does someone actually find this? And actually, let me put it in more visceral terms. I do one-on-one coaching, a lot of hedge fund CIOs, big shots. And they always give 10s, 50s, huge amounts of money in the bank. And they say, once I retire, then I'll take a photography class.
Right.
Or I'll learn how to cook.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, you have $50 million. You can literally take the photography class yesterday.
Yeah.
Right. And so I feel like this archetype has an aversion to hobbies, especially hobbies that can make them.
You know what it is
low
though,
status.
Con? Okay?
Yeah.
That's fear talking. They're scared to leave the world that they've crafted because their money is no good outside of that world. And so I call what you're describing someday thinking. It's a complete fallacy. Like, someday I'll do this. When I get 10 million in the bank, I'll do this. Life doesn't work that way. The reason it doesn't is because everything compounds. So if you want to become a good surfer, can you do that overnight?
Yeah.
No,
I've
of course
surfed
not.
1,500 days.
It takes years and years and years of practice.
And I still suck.
That's right. Yeah. Same with climbing. So, everything compounds. So the time to do it is now. In fact, the longer you wait, the harder it is to escape that mentality. One other thing I want to mention, I actually don't like the word hobby because that it sort of implies like something that's secondary in importance. And for me, climbing absolutely is not, like, I refer to it as a passionate pursuit. Like, climbing is not secondary in importance to me at this point in my life. In fact, it's probably on par with the work that I do in my family. Like, those are the three things.
I love that.
So I don't think of climbing as a hobby because it's a big part of my life. That's my community. It informs my vacations. It informs where I live, everything. But yeah, I think it's super, like, this is the what I call being multidimensional. If you don't build a multidimensional life from the beginning, it's very hard to build later.
I love that. I was curious because we've talked about moving again to another place near the beach, like maybe Portugal. The thing, your eldest just went to college?
Yes, I just sent my first one to college. Yep.
In New York?
Yeah, in New York. Yep.
In New York. Oh, amazing. So our paths will be crossing more because we go to New York. I'm from New York, and we go.
Oh, nice.
We go. Also, congratulations.
Thank you.
It's very, very.
Selfishly, it's an excuse to visit a city I love.
Yeah. I dream for my kids to go to college in New York, London, or Paris. I was wondering though. So 6 years ago, that daughter was. You have two girls. That daughter was 12.
I do. Yep.
And
they were 10 and 12.
10 and 12. So two girl dad here. I'm 9 and 6. So kind of, we're living these kind of like staggered by 8-year lives.
Yep.
The funny thing happens when you have kids or with as you get older is that there's all these voices that say, you can't do that. Like, and so one of the voices that I hear often is, if you move your kids when they're in middle school, they'll hate you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Right? They have friends and this and that. And I've become very wary of anyone that ever says like, oh, once this life milestone happens, then this life thing will never happen. But I do think about the fact, like, what was it like moving teenage, preteen kids, presumably leaving their core friend groups, the only place they had ever known?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. And what I would say is the people who say, oh, how could you move your kids right in the middle of their schooling? That's fear talking again. They don't know. These are people who have never taken a chance in their life. And so the question is, what are you moving toward? Right? So I won't lie, like I had to force the move to Boulder. Like my wife had a great community where we lived in Dallas. She wasn't looking to move. The kids certainly weren't looking to move. They didn't know like what's on the other side of this. They just, all they see is like a bunch of scary change. So I had to take the responsibility because it was something I needed. You know, I was in my mid 40s. It's something I needed. I'd paid my dues, and it's something I needed for the next phase of life. And huge credit to my wife for being consummate support. Yeah, she was more than willing to go along. It was tough on the kids, but part of that responsibility I bore was to make sure that what's on the other side of that is something better. And now, fast forward 6 years, if you ask my kids, I think they would say, absolutely, like they can't even imagine living in Texas anymore. Like they go back to visit, they're like, oh my gosh, we used to live here. And because you move towards something better. So if you're always moving to something better, there's really no downside. What we do in our minds though, is we tend to, the challenges that are there, we tend to magnify them like 100x. And we tend to minimize the upsides. And so this is my thing about people who like have this vague dream of living somewhere better, but they'll never do it. That's exactly what's going on, is that it's fear. They're magnifying all the, what about my job? What about my friend group? What about my church? What about, I get my hair cut here, and they minimize the huge upsides. I've talked to dozens, if not hundreds of people who have made that tough decision to relocate. I've yet to find someone who regrets it. In fact, most of them say it's the best decision they ever made.
Yep. And you can always go, if it's not, you can go back.
That's right. Nothing's permanent.
Nothing's permanent. It's funny because we had a bit of with my family, some like health issues with our parents, and it required a lot of travel because they're on the East Coast, we're on the West Coast. And I remember another one of those things that people would say is, oh, you can't move away from aging parents.
Yep.
And the funny enough, the interesting that happened is, one is we see our parents all the time because of the flexibility and because of the desire to see them. So we've spent tons of time with them, traveling, and them seeing us. And then when this family emergency happened, we have financial safety net, we have flexibility safety net, we shuffled things around in our community. But, we were there just as much as the siblings. They could drive 2 hours, even though we had to fight, and sometimes it meant taking a red eye. Sometimes it meant paying this ridiculous premium just so you could not miss the first day of school. And it was like, but again, it was just, I turned to my wife and I was like, you remember all the people that like, you can't move away from your parents when they're aging? And they're like, look at how we just showed up. And it's just, you don't, in the moment, like, I love how you've said it 2 or 3 times now, that's fear talking. Right. And we don't think about the negativity bias. We only see what could go wrong, and we don't think about the possibility of what could go right.
Well, the flip side is also like, I would bet in most of those cases, those people's parents would say, absolutely, go chase your dream. They wouldn't say, no, I need you here to take care of me. Very rarely would parents be that selfish. And we found the same thing as you, like that. We have everybody, like that's a common thing. Like, oh, what about your parents, your family, blah, blah, blah. And the reality is same as you. We see them almost just as much. And in fact, in some ways, it's higher quality time because you're more deliberate about the time you spend.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's beautiful. I'd love to ask you a few questions in this kind of staggering. I would say my audience is probably around my age, maybe bias is a little bit younger, and you cover the big gamut. But, so I'm in the kind of pre-high school. I'm still in elementary school. I'm in my mid 40s. I was wondering, like, if you think about, this question of success and these different dimensions we've talked about: success, health, experience, relationships, and we've covered a lot of them, career. But if you would go back and kind of say, like, these are the things that are really important, let's say like in your 40s, like knowing what you know now about how the 12 years have played out, both for you and your peers.
Yeah. Actually, what I hadn't had this thought in many years, but when you said that, it just came into my mind. I distinctly remember that when I turned 40, my dad sat me down and he said, hey, the reality is anything that was on your someday list, you better do it in your 40s, because when you're 50 or 60, you're much more unlikely to do it. So I think that's a little bit of a wake-up call. I think, for me, 40 wasn't a thing. Like it wasn't a big transition for me. 50 was. 50, I became really reflective for some reason. But I know for some people, 40 is a big deal. And I think it's a good time to reflect and say, like, draw out your end state life list and ask yourself, like, what's the gap between the life I live today and what I really want? Because guess what? I'm not 25 anymore. I don't have decades to kind of push this stuff off. I need to start making real progress toward the end state life that I want. And I think that can be a catalyst for a lot of healthy change.
Yeah, I love that. What do you think of, I mean, you've always been fit, climbers are some of the most fit people, but I've seen you write about, kind of two groups of people. There's like your peers that take care of themselves physically and those that don't. What have you noticed kind of like that, the bifurcation of that? What does one group do differently other than obviously exercise?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and by the way, on my end state life list, I just looked at it on my list. It literally says be top 0.1% fit, not top 1%, but 0.1% fit. That's really important. And the reason for that is fit people just lead better lives. I mean, it's at a very fundamental level, like fit people have better sex. Fit people can do more in a day. Literally, they're less fatigued. Like there's just all these benefits, and your body is your only vessel for experiencing life. I just don't understand why you wouldn't want to have the best vessel possible to experience life. And fitness is like anything else. It's a compounded thing. Like this is going to sound maybe a little bit arrogant, but I just think it's funny. It's like I'll occasionally have people say, "Hey man, like you're really super fit for a guy in his early 50s. What's the secret?" I say, "Oh, it's really, really easy. It's just 30 days of exercising 5 days a week. 30 years, sorry, of exercising 5 days a week."
Yeah.
Again, it is compounding. Now, it's never too late to get started, but fitness needs to be more than just a workout. It needs to be part of your lifestyle and part of your identity. And that's why, by the way, one of my hot takes is that, you don't see many super fit people in their 50s and beyond who are gym rats. Like they go into the gym and lift weights. What the fittest people in the world who are 50 and beyond, they gain fitness through a functional pursuit. In my case, it's climbing. It could be surfing, whatever.
Yeah.
Because the reason is because it sticks, because it's more than just a fitness pursuit. It's a lifestyle. It's something they're passionate about. The fitness is almost a byproduct of it. Like I actually did not get into climbing because I wanted to lose weight or get fit or get strong or whatever. I got into climbing because I thought climbing was badass and I wanted to get good at it. It's a life mastery of climbing, mastery of surfing is a lifelong pursuit. And guess what? Along the way, you're going to get super fit and ripped or whatever,
Yeah. I love that. I have friends who are salsa dancers.
Whatever.
They are in such good shape. Like if you dance every, 2 hours a day, 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Oh man, I absolutely love that. Let me go back. Let's go back to the money question. I think one of these questions, this is something that has bothered me. I don't think I've never said this on a podcast, but I did really well and I think you said it. I did really well on Wall Street. I think you said it. The money I walked away from is way more than the money that I have.
Yep.
And I always had this story in my head is that I would actually capture that delta. Like I would basically make it back by becoming an entrepreneur. So there was this kind of like trading one game for another. And I did that for a little while, but like you mentioned with the VC back thing, I've just reached a point where to make a lot of money, I've realized that you need to hire people, you need to manage people. And when you do those two things, you lose control of your time. I mean, there's no way around that. And so what I'm definitely like optimized much more for contractors, but there's a limit to how much money you can make with contractors. That's the reality of it. Recently, I just let go of this and it was freeing because it was like, I'm not trying to basically make up that difference anymore. Yeah. Because it was just this fucking made up bullshit number that like, it's like you can't even really measure it. And like, we're not like going to run around and be like, hey, I beat you, like 27 years later, scoreboard. But I do struggle. It really, I feel it when I see people who I hired that have like millions and millions of more dollars than me. I'm like, I fucking hired you out of college. You knew nothing. You were a little twerp, a kind twerp. How do you kind of, you're a competitive person.
Yeah.
How do you separate that
Yeah.
feeling of competition, enoughness, and the bank account?
I love this question. And it really boils down to something very simple, which is, what are you competing on? What measures are you competing on? And I had a similar thing to you. Like when I sort of rebooted my life, I was like, you know what? Over the long term, I'll probably recoup a lot of that money that I walked away from. But what you eventually realize is you ascend to a higher level, which it sounds like you've done recently, which is you say, you know what? That was so misguided. I actually don't even need that money. I don't want it because of what it comes with.
Yeah.
That to me is the highest level. I'll tell you, it's very gratifying. It was a selfishly perverse thing in a way. I had this event that I hosted last week, and in terms of net worth, like I was probably in the bottom 10% of this group that I assembled, like a group of absolute killers in business. But I'll be honest, like I look across that crowd and you'd be hard pressed to find one of them that has a better life than me.
No.
So that's my measure. Like, how great is your life? And part of me, the selfish impetus for hosting this event is I wanted for them to see what this life looks like, to get a glimpse of it, because some of these guys have come to me and said, hey, Kevin, I've got all the money in the world, but I'm not super happy. Like I don't feel fulfilled. And more money isn't going to solve that, right? It's making some changes in other areas of your life. And so, to me, I think that's ultimately, we all get there. Hopefully, the sooner you can get there, the better. Hopefully it's not in your 80s when it's kind of in some ways too late, but you realize that, what are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing for this arbitrary number in a bank account, or are you optimizing for having a great life?
Yeah, I absolutely love that. What do you think of your legacy, like how people will talk about you when you're gone?
Yeah, and again, it's the same thing. It's like, how are you going to measure?
You go back to that 30 list, that 30 point.
Yeah, it's like, but even at a more of a meta level, it's like, I think my mission in life is to kind of open people's eyes to this different way. And you and I are very aligned on this. Like you preach about this same stuff on Twitter. The reality is, most people, and this is especially like, I think most of my audience is men, who a certain type of man who is a high achiever. They're achieving in their career, but they have this vague notion that they want more out of life. They want deep connection. They want adventure. My sort of mission in life is to open people's eyes to how they can get there, how they can build not just a great career, because there's plenty of information out there on that, but how do you build a great multidimensional life?
I love that.
That in some ways is my legacy, and it has yet to be written. I mean, I've got some big dream projects on the drawing board that are sort of 100% aligned with that mission, and I'm only now starting to think about how I could go and pursue those projects.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. If I asked your daughter, you could pick your daughter. It's like, what do you think Kevin? What eats at Kevin internally? Like, if I ask your daughter, like where do you get stuck or in your own head? If I ask your daughter, what eats at your dad? Like, where does he get in his own head or get frustrated or upset? Like, how do you think they would answer?
Well, they would probably see that reflected as like, where do they see, like in their interactions, where do they see me get frustrated or angry or fail? And I think they would probably say something along the lines of like, I demand a lot out of myself and of others, and sometimes to an unhealthy degree.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably like a challenge that I struggle with a little bit, is always chasing the next thing, the better thing, the shiny object. And I'm not really good at stopping to smell the roses. Some people spend too much time smelling the roses and aren't putting in the work. I'm sort of the opposite of that, where I'm always on, like rarely take time to sort of savor the life I've built. I'm always the next thing and the next thing. And I will tell you though, just in the past, I'm 52, just in the past year or two, I've started to really slow down and look around and like, wow, I've got this great life. I really just need to enjoy it. I've already won.
But you live in fucking Boulder, man. It's like the most savory place in the country.
But to be honest, like I think that tension, as long as it's a healthy tension, is good, right? Because you don't want to ever just like completely stop and like watch TV all day and just like enjoy, quote unquote, enjoy retirement. You want to have struggle, you want to have challenge, but you've got to have a balance, right?
Yeah.
So, I think they'd probably say just like my relentless pursuit, maniacal pursuit of the next thing is a challenge.
Yeah. Oh, so I'll give you a little practice that I just started that was inspired by Tara Brach, who's a spiritual teacher, Buddhist. And she called, it's actually, we talked earlier about the negativity bias, how we, like, people can only see the worst outcome.
Yeah.
And so that hardens our brain path. So just in general, we always just see the worst outcome. And so we miss the beautiful outcome. And so she calls this, I might have coined the term, but it's her practice. She calls it savoring. And so every night in bed, or, what in your wind down ritual, you think of a moment in your day. And it could be something really simple, like you were really thirsty and the water just tasted so good, or the way the light yesterday in LA, we just had this like pink, it was literally a pink sky. It was this pink sky for 15 minutes. But because, like you said, we're always on to the next thing, you basically meditate on that thing in your head for 30 seconds, and you'll watch, you'll go to your to-do list, or like, you'll be like, this is boring, like, give me something else. And what happens, I've done this for a month or two now, is that then you start doing it in real time.
Yeah.
And then you don't do it one moment for 30 seconds. You might do it 5 times for 30 seconds as it's happening.
Yeah.
And I would imagine at some point, your whole life becomes savoring, right? Because what a beauty is to be human. So
I
two
love
cents.
that. I love that. And in a way, what you're talking about is gratitude, and making gratitude a practice. And how do you make anything a practice or a habit? At first, it takes effort, and then over time, it becomes second nature. I'll give you a quick example, actually. I'm slowly getting better at this. Right before we started recording, it's a beautiful day here in Boulder. It's like 70 and sunny. So I got my afternoon cup of coffee, and I went and sat on our front porch without my phone. And I just sat there and drank my cup of coffee on the porch for 15 minutes. And in that moment, I was like, wow, this is what makes life great. Like, it's a very simple, forgettable moment, but that's what great life is made of.
It's everything. Yeah, I love that. All right, last question, because you've been so generous with your time. It comes back to kids, and the TLDR. I've been reading this book called Toxic Achievement, and it talks about achievement culture in affluent neighborhoods, which it's at Boulder, Manhattan Beach, all across the United States. And it's this crazy statistic. It says that teenagers in these communities are as likely to have substance abuse or depression and anxiety, clinical depression and anxiety, as kids whose parents just moved to the United States, and kids who have incarcerated parents. So the level of stress that these kids, presumably, maybe not your kids specifically, but the environment that is in a Boulder public high school or private high school, that they're feeling indirectly from the peer group, the community, the coaching complex, the tutoring complex, the SAT complex, the Ivy League complex, like all of that stuff. And so I know that. So I want to juxtapose two things that you just said that I know about you. One is, you said you never really put a lot of pressure for grades. I've seen you write about that.
Yeah.
And the other thing you said is, I'm very relentless on myself. And I wonder this, because I think I'm like you in, I really don't care where my kids go to college.
Right.
I'm not like forcing them to tutors and all that stuff. I'm not donating money I don't care. Like, I just want them to be well-rounded, kind kids who can function in society with an open heart. But I model extremely intense behavior.
Yeah.
Like my meditation, my stretching, my eating, you name it, right? Like I model it. I wonder if because they always say kids are like, it's not what you say, it's what you do.
Totally.
And I get very nervous that even though I'm not saying anything, they're like, Dad just, like, everyone's, like, every human's watching TV, and Dad is like reading Crime and Punishment, like on a fucking Saturday afternoon, and all his friends are drinking at a USC game. Do you think about the disconnect between spoken, expectations and modeled behavior? And you're also ahead in that race to college and all that. So,
man, ton to unpack there. And anytime I talk about parenting, my first disclaimer is always, anyone that claims to have parenting figured out is a lunatic or a liar. We're all figuring it out. Same thing with marriage. But, for sure, like, there are certain, like, we all have traits that we hate about ourselves that you don't want to see your kids, pick up, and vice versa. Like, there's also like things that you'd love for them to inherit from you. And no doubt, like, you can, kids are pretty smart, right? You can say whatever, but it's what you do that really matters. And by the way, Boulder is a hyper-achieving place. Like the culture
I
here
imagine.
is best of everything. Everything's a competition. In fact, I just had a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday that was actually a huge turnoff because she's so focused on like all of her kids have to be the best at everything. She was talking about the SAT score. I just don't give a shit about any of that. So that's a good starting point, is like not having these crazy expectations for your kids, like letting that pressure off. My main focus from a parenting standpoint is, I tell my kids this every day, is I want you to make good decisions. I want to give you the tools to make good decisions. And am I perfect? Absolutely not. But I will say, on the whole, the behaviors that I model are, way more healthy than not. So I'm big on making good decisions. Do I take my hard drive to an extreme? Yes, for sure. There are worse habits to have, I guess, in this world. But on the whole, I like to think I'm modeling. And then the other thing is, I'm not the only parent here. My wife happens to be the exact opposite of me in just about every way.
Mine.
We're literally like, if you look at like the Enneagram personality test or any of the others, we are literally the opposites. And so there's a balancing kind of effect that happens there. And hopefully they pick up, what you want for your kids is they pick up the best of both you and your spouse, right?
Yep.
And you minimize the worst. And, I have to say that we all fret about parenting, right? And, we wonder if we're doing a good job, if we're doing a horrible job. There's times when things are going badly from a parenting standpoint, and you question yourself. And the best quote I ever heard on parenting is from someone you probably really respect, who's Laird Hamilton.
Yes.
Laird Hamilton is a world famous big wave surfer, lives in Hawaii. He's married to Gabby Reese, who's a former pro volleyball player and model. And one time Laird walked into their house and Gabby was crying because she was at her wit's end. She's like, I can't get through to my kids. I'm a terrible parent. And Laird, in typical like sort of Zen fashion, said, you're here and you love them. The rest is details. And I repeat that all the time, because that is really the truth. Like if you're present and you love them, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to do some things right. But honestly, the rest is details. Now, you're here and you love them. It sounds easy. It's not as easy as it sounds, right? Especially the being here. Like you have to be present. And fully present. And so that's something that I try to focus on, is just living by, like, we can complicate the heck out of parenting, but at the end of the day, if you're here and you love them, you've done 90% of it.
Yeah. Beautiful. Wow. That's a good place to wrap.
Yeah, that's a great place.
You're here and you love it. I just want to say first, thank you, Kevin. You're so wise. You're so energetic. You're exactly who I thought you would be, like, having been, being that you're my favorite Twitter friend out there. So thank you so much. And, selfishly, I just pinched myself. I'm like, this is my fucking work. So like we've been talking about these abstractions, like, owning your time, be around people you like, be creatively inspired. I'm like, I pitched myself and I said, like, this is what I do for work, right? It's like, I have interesting conversations on Twitter. I translate them into real life. We're going to meet up in person, either in New York or Boulder or LA or somewhere else. And I'm just super honored. And I'm so glad that our listeners will get to know you better.
Well, this was a blast. I don't feel like we actually did a podcast. I feel like we were just hanging out, chatting.
There you go. One of my mantras is, what if it was easy?
Yeah.
So, right, like I don't prepare. I just show up. I don't there's no scripting. I just do a cold open.
Yeah.
I want it easy because it's all about the conversation.
Let it flow. I'm with you, brother.
Amazing. Where can our listeners learn more about you? We'll put it in the show notes too.
Yeah. My hub is Twitter. It's really the only social media I do. So I'm at Camp4, CAMP and the number 4. Check it out. DM me. I respond to all DMs, and I'll do that as long as I can manage.
Yes.
So thanks, Kay. This has been a really fun podcast.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Talk to you soon.